Hello, Tesco's own brand Alan Moore here, and I don't particularly want to talk about the Yasuke controversy with Assassin's Creed, but it's pissed me off enough that I'm going to. The new Assassin's Creed game that is coming out is set in Japan, which has been a long time coming for Assassin's Creed, because after all, you think assassins, you think ninjas. You have a choice of two characters you can play, one of which is a female ninja, apparently. The other one is a samurai, but it's caused something of a controversy because he is not of Japanese origin.
Wow, this is amazing, Dad. The most famous painting in the world. It's inspiring, isn't it?
Inspiring? Of course it's inspiring. Because it's Indian!
He is a barely attested to historical figure who happens to have been a black man who was probably a slave to the Portuguese, or someone who was left there for a while, became some sort of retainer, but we really don't know that much about him. And so the controversy is basically why, after all this time, we get a Japanese Assassin's Creed, and yet you can't play a Japanese man in it. And instead, we have a black man in it as a samurai, which is a very controversial and not particularly well supported reading of the history. So now we've got one side yapping, everyone's racist, and we've got the other side yapping, everyone's woke, which is kind of irrelevant and not really what this is about, but it's a cheap and easy thing to get people riled up.
When me and Brad first met, I didn't think we'd get along, but turns out we kind of agree on everything. Your racial identity is the most important thing. Everything should be looked at through the lens of race. Jakes, you owe me a Coke.
I may even have succumbed and clickbaited the title of this because I want people to see my more nuanced opinion. I was disappointed to see that Eric Kane made what I call the Butmer Dragons argument about this, to say it's irrelevant, in that, and I've seen a lot of other people make the same argument as well, in that there are weird and fantastical elements in a lot of the Assassin's Creed games. There are world and time spanning conspiracies. There's ancient, prehistorical, highly technological societies that were essentially wiped out or harmed, at least, by a catastrophic event. There are weird devices and leftovers and places and things from that old society. There are things that seem like magic, but it's just sufficiently advanced technology and so on. And so people point to that. They point to the more fantastical elements of the setting and go, see, that means anything is possible. Right? Which doesn't actually hold and doesn't make sense. I mean, there's magic and dragons, and there are monsters of all kinds, there are ghosts and vampires and all sorts, even though you don't necessarily see them all in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. But if Shadowfax was a Honda Accord, it wouldn't really work, would it? So the mere fact that there are fantastical things within a setting does not mean anything goes, because it doesn't necessarily make sense. Assassin's Creed has been very much built upon the idea that it is rooted in a lot of real history, and then the more fantastical elements are built upon and around that. So it's trying to create a plausible, not entirely accurate, but plausible sense of place and history, and then it's adding weird bullshit to that to make the game more interesting and to introduce its unique elements. And for everything outside of those weird elements, the Assassin's Creed series of games has been largely known for its historical accuracy and plausibility. The representation of certain historical figures, particularly the geography and the architecture that you explore. So much so that the measurements and models that they made for various buildings in various forms of Assassin's Creed have been since used to go back and restore places like, say, Notre Dame, which obviously had a horrible burning problem at one point. And Assassin's Creed's measurements and understanding of the building was in part used to help figure out how to do the restoration. When they recreated London for Assassin's Creed Syndicate, a lot of the buildings in that were long gone, and they reconstructed them, the train stations and so on, in a fairly faithful sort of way. It was possible to play Assassin's Creed and to recognise fleetingly for moments where it was in London that you actually were compared to the real London. People were matching up locations between the game and reality to see what sort of fidelity it had. This was so well done and so important to the identity of Assassin's Creed as a series of games that many of the games were used to teach history, to teach architecture. Some of the games were even used in different versions slightly as history tours. So you could just, walk the streets of ancient Greece or wherever without having to worry about the fighting. And some additional information was layered on about points of interest and so on. So it was good enough to be used in classrooms. Right? That's how important and how key their attempt at fidelity to history was. Now, weirdness began creeping in a while back in Syndicate again. They made roughly half the gang members that you end up straight up murking throughout the game women. Now, it's not to say that there weren't criminal gangs in Victorian London that included women, but the women, for the most part, historically speaking, were shoplifters, confidence tricksters, prostitutes, all of that kind of thing. And the violence was largely left to the male gangs, which were allied to the female gangs. But here we were murdering as many women as men, which felt kind of weird, misogynistic even, and threw you off from the sense of immersion into the game. Weird. And now they've chosen Yasuke. Now, there are reasons he could be a good choice. The fact that we don't know much about him leaves him wide open for special interpretations and doing all kinds of interesting things with him. The fact that he was so close to important people, even if he was just a retainer or a sword carrier or groom of the stool or whatever, that puts him in a good and interesting place. He's an outsider to the society, and so experiencing the society through his eyes is a good way to ease a player into understanding that society, the choices, the etiquette and so on that you make or have to make. But there are also reasons he could be a bad choice. The degree of historicity of the accounts about him varies wildly. He doesn't appear to have been that significant a figure, really. He sticks out like a sore thumb in a game which is about stealth and murder. And the huge black guy sticks out a bit. If you're looking for strangers and foreigners who may have just murdered someone, first port of call is probably going to be the guy who's 1 to 2 heads taller than everybody else and black as the ace of spades. It stands out. There's also the fact that this is a kind of hypocritical DEI sort of thing here, because they're removing one racial minority, Japanese from their point of view, to replace them with another racial minority. Now, this seems to be rooted in American cultural imperialism. In fact, they view the rest of the world as being exactly the same as America. It's even worse if you're in an English-speaking country. Americans trying to apply their local racial politics to the UK or Australia or New Zealand or Canada even. It is hypocritical. And here is our first game set in Japan, and you choose to replace a Japanese man with an African man, and it comes across hypocritical, and then the wild accusations of racism come across as projection. So all of this discussion that's going on has been boiled down to you're woke, you're racist, and it's useless. There are more nuanced reasons to see either side of the argument. I would come down against, because this is the first game in Japan. I think he would be better as a background character like Sucrates in previous games, because he's a point of interest and maybe a contact, and maybe he is an information broker for the assassins or something. But to focus in on him as a character was obviously and always going to be controversial, hypocritical, and probably not the best choice. But here we are. Just go and play Afro Samurai. Zang. A problem for every games master has always been coming up with adventure ideas. For years now, Postmortem Studios has been helping out with the 100 Adventure Seeds line. These provide adventure ideas for all genres, and you can get them at RPG Now or lulu.com.